On Monday, we had the candidates confirmed. That is the MSPs Michael Mara and Joe Fagan. Before we come to them, there was the sort of really big story about fellow MSP Monica Lennon effectively getting knocked out because she did not receive the necessary number of nominations. And that has generated a bit of a backlash from people who think that it was wrong not to have a female candidate and someone on the left. Dan, do you think it looks bad that Monica Lennon was not excluded, but is not on the ballot?
Yeah, I don't think it's a great look, if I'm honest. I think what I think you see here is a disconnect between, you could say, the parliamentary party, the establishment of the party, and its wider grassroots membership. She is popular with members. She is popular with trade unions. She ran Anna Sarwar a close second last time out. She's a formidable campaigner. She was in Vogue once because she actually has some name recognition. Although Monica Lennon is a Sunday Mail columnist, I'm not going all in for her, but I do think it would have been an interesting debate to have with her in it. I think Labour is at a crossroads at the moment in Scotland. If they don't get their act together, they're looking at a very, very grim future. And this would have been a good time to have a wide debate, a debate that brought in lots of different ideas. Monica has lots of things to say about redistribution of wealth, about taxation, and I think social issues as well. And instead, what we have are, if I'm being fairly candid, two blokes who most people never heard of. I think that's a bit of a shame, and I think Labour is already being ignored by the Scottish electorate. That's just going to continue during this contest, I suspect.
Doug, we'll come to the candidates in a minute, but just finally on Monica Lennon, I think the reasons for her not making the ballot are complex and varied. There's no doubt she's had personality clashes with other parliamentarians. There's maybe ideological disagreements there. Certainly on the left, there was a disagreement on the trans issue that resulted in Carol Mockin not backing her until the very last moment. Do you think, is there a danger by her not being on the ballot that they're maybe making a martyr of her?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things I'll say is I've known Monica a long time, since she was a councillor at South Lanarkshire Council, and I was a reporter on the Reformer. So I've always liked her. I've always got on well with her. But I think, I might not always agree with her, but I think she's someone who's in it for the right reasons. But ultimately, I think her biggest problem was that she was the preferred candidate of the SNP and the Scottish Greens. And I think in some ways, when your opponents are picking you out as their preferred candidate, it's never going to, I don't think it's ever really going to go in your favour. And from that point of view, I think the left will now hold Monica Lennon up as their champion, their kind of hard done by champion. And I think you'll see the Greens and the SNP kind of playing that up throughout the contest, and ultimately, it might be between Joe Fagan and Michael Mara, but she's probably going to be the name on everyone's lips. Well, everyone who's actually interested in it, because as you say, Paul, this leadership contest is hardly capturing the public's attention.
You mentioned that, Doug. I was at the Edinburgh hustings last night, and she was mentioned repeatedly.
Yeah.
Not being on the ballot, so you're probably right on that.
I mean, obviously, there's still quite a long and convoluted process we're going through. So, come the end of it, she may have been semi-forgotten about, but right now she is the kind of main, the main person, the Scottish Labour figure who's got the most public recognition, albeit that might not be as much as Scottish Labour would like. But, she completely overshadows the debate now between two guys who, if you were asked your average punter on the street, let's be honest here, won't have a clue who either of them are really. Michael Mara maybe, but Joe Fagan is something of an unknown quantity to the vast majority of voters, and I think that's
And
Labour's
journalists.
biggest problem. Yeah, and journalists, and I think that's Labour's biggest problem is that outside that kind of Holyrood bubble, people just don't care right now. That's the issue. And somebody like Monica might have injected a bit of star quality, I suppose, a bit of razzmatazz into it, and they're going to be denied that.
So it's now a battle between Mara and Fagan. Mara's a North East MSP. Fagan was elected for the first time to represent South Scotland in May. Both are what you would describe as Labour moderates. They're not on the left. There's not a huge deal separating them in terms of policy. I think Michael Mara will run on the fact that he's got more experience, that he's maybe a more credible leadership figure. Joe Fagan will probably run on the fact that he's not been part of past electoral failures like Michael Mara has, that he's never been part of the Holyrood bubble, even though he did work for an MSP. But following their campaign so far, okay, they admit that their party has received a series of electoral drubbings. Things can't go on the way that they're going on. They don't seem to have a radical prospectus, Dan, for change and actually turning it around.
I think that has been my overriding impression so far. I mean, it's difficult because it's only just started. They've still got plenty of time to set out their stall. But so far, there hasn't really seemed to be any serious policies put forward where you would sort of go, okay, that's something to grab the attention. And, it's one minor point, I suppose, but, one thing that Monica Lennon talks about a little bit is the Constitution, and, we could go round and round as to, whether or not it's the right position or not. We've got Doug Dickie here. I'm sure he'd disagree, but Monica's always been a bit more open to, I guess, broadening out the constitutional question and trying to come up with a way through the never-ending impasse, I suppose. And then, basically the only thing I've seen about Joe Fagan in the last week or so is him saying, no Indy Ref 2 under any circumstances, bish bash boss, the same old line that they've been putting out for years now, and it hasn't really helped them so far. So I hope to be pleasantly surprised during the campaign, and that they're both fizzing full of ideas and policies coming out of their ears. But you sort of strongly doubt it, don't you?
Yeah, look, my take on it is that, it's often said Scottish Labour have lost 5 elections in a row to the SNP, but I think the better point is, the more salient point, is that they deserve to lose all of those elections. The SNP had better leaders, they had policies that connected better with voters, and that was reflected in the results. And now more than ever, Scottish Labour need a no-holds-barred leadership contest that deals with the fundamentals of those defeats, the relationship with the UK party, how to speak to pro-independence voters. Why is it that they've not produced an eye-catching policy in about 20 years? But what we seem to be getting is just a narrowly focused debate on insular Labour concerns that are appealing to about 5,000 people. And as you say, Dan, Joe Fagan's policy on Indy Ref 2, which is a blanket refusal to even consider it, that might play well with the 5,000 people who vote in this contest. But how about the 900,000 folk who voted SNP in May? It completely excludes them. So I think the key thing here is that Scottish Labour need to have a strategy for engaging with and persuading about 50% of the electorate that absolutely hate them and will not even consider voting for them in a Holyrood election. And I just think that this contest, it could have been something, but I think it's going to be business as usual.
Aren't we though? Labour aren't going to out SNP the SNP. That's not how they're going to win. And Paul, we talk about how they're pissing off 50% or whatever. We can argue the toss. What the actual figure is all day. But why would you then, on the flip side, alienate the people that are actually voting for you? Now there might not be many of them, but for every pro-independence voter they might win over by being a bit more lenient on the constitution. They might
I'm
lose
not,
to
I'm not
unionist
suggesting.
voters.
What I'm suggesting is that people who vote SNP do so because the SNP have got a radical vision of change, and people know what the SNP stand for. You might disagree with it. You might think independence is a load of old rubbish, but a lot of people subscribe to that. What is Labour's radical vision of change that competes with that? They have to have an alternative to independence that is seen as a cause and a rallying cry to get people to vote, that can then maybe persuade people who vote SNP to actually go Labour. I think that Labour right now, at this moment in time, they are basically a tactical anti-SNP vote. Very few people are actually voting Labour because of a policy perspective or a set of because of their philosophy. It's to either stop the Tories or to stop the SNP, and there's always going to be a limit on that.
And you can't sort of you can't be more SNP than the SNP, but you also can't be more Tory than the Tories, which is something Labour have also learned in the past. Like, they can't really win. They're either not lenient enough in the constitution, or they get flanked on the other side by the Tories. They've been getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed for years now. And I think Paul's right. I think what they need to do is come up with their own solution to these questions. And like, voters will listen to exciting prospectuses. If voters are given a reason to care, if they're given something to get excited about, you can see them turn out. But what Labour's been producing, certainly in the last Holyrood election, that manifesto was uninspiring drivel. And I think until you get to a point where they're willing to actually put forward policies that are going to excite people again, they're not going to get anywhere.
Doug, one point just to pick up on you again, Doug, about out SNP and the SNP. So if you take the constituency of Dundee City West at the Holyrood election, which is the one that Michael Mara contested. So the SNP won 12,722 votes. Michael Mara came second with 6,365. So it was a majority of around 6,400, something like that. If he'd managed to get all the votes that Reform had won, the Lib Dems and the Tories, he would have still fallen short. The SNP candidate would still have won. While the SNP are polling 38% in the constituencies nationally, Labour can't win. They're going to have to come up with a way to get some of those voters into their own. And I'm not saying back independence. Yeah. Clearly, Labour are a unionist party. They're never going to do that. But they did it in the general election. They need to find a way of doing it in the Holyrood election as well.
Well, I think Dan's description of their manifesto as uninspiring drivel was being really polite, to be honest. It was absolutely, it was absolutely diabolical. And I think their election campaign, and look, I don't think they should soften on the constitution, but they definitely need to offer. I think the biggest problem for me, for Labour at the election, is they didn't offer anything. All they offered was what they weren't, at least in 2024. Now, we all know that it turned out to be, a crock of rubbish, but they at least offered, change. It was that kind of, the idea of change. Labour didn't even offer that at this time. It was just constant. This sounds incredible for somebody at the Scottish Daily Express to complain about this, but it just felt like it was constant digs at the SNP from Labour without actually. But I think when you're in election mode, you need to provide something more than just having a go at your opponent. You've got to provide an alternative, and Labour have completely failed to do that. Uninspired, and I'm not sure Michael Mara or Joe Fagan. Joe Fagan at least seems a bit spiky. I think, Anis Sauer, quite a mild-mannered guy and very, well thought out. At least Joe Fagan seems like he's got a bit of personality about himself. But Michael Mara is obviously a competent operator. But, I'm not sure Labour needs either of those two things if they kind of eat into that SNP vote right now. They need something. They need to offer something different. They need to offer something new.
Doug, you've covered Scottish politics for a long time, or you've been interested in it for a long time. Can you remember the last time Scottish Labour at Holyrood level came up with a policy that got people talking?
No. The ban on smoking in pubs.
Maybe that was back in Was
That's
it
2 decades.
2006? That's 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I was in high
I mean,
school.
no,
I was
absolutely.
in school.
Of course, I'm not sure many of the parties out with the SNP, because SNP are so dominant. I'm not sure many of them have come up with policies that get people talking. I think that's the thing. Holyrood's become a bit of a talking shop in general. I don't think it's just Labour who're guilty of that. But yeah, if you ask someone what Scottish Labour's achievements or ideas have been in the last 2 decades, I think the list's going to be pretty short.
So we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon. There's going to be an STV debate this evening between Michael Mara and Joe Fagan. Not sure how well watched it will be, but I think there's going to be another hustings as well, and the result in the contest will be announced at a special conference in September. I mean, I think it's in all of our interests for Scottish politics to be competitive. We don't want elections where one party just keeps on winning it convincingly. We want a genuine battle of ideas and a bit of rivalry, don't we?
Yeah, and I think as well, if it's not going to be Labour, it's probably going to be Reform, isn't it, who starts to fill that gap and compete with the SNP. And if that is the future that Labour faces if it doesn't get its act together, being a third wheel to Reform.